who heard him preach, who traveled the countryside with him, had meals with him, probably slept under the stars with him. They knew him well. And if you remember the story, they traveled all day, all afternoon with this stranger, walk into the village of Emmaus, and they don't get it. What's that all about? Why not? If anybody would recognize Jesus, the risen one, it should be his friends, right? The people he knew best, who knew him best. And they don't. They go all day long. Maybe it was something about his risen nature. Another one of the possibilities is this. You know that the stories that we hear in the New Testament scriptures and in the letters, those things were written down many, 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 many years after the events took place. So this story about the disciples on the road to Emmaus was written down 60, 70, 80, 90, maybe even 100 years after the events. You know what happens to family stories as the generations go on and they're passed on, right? The heart of the story stays the same. And the core of the story stays, but the details change a little bit. The other thing is that the people writing those gospel stories, they were writing it not just as a historical record, but they were writing it as a way of evangelizing people, of taking the good news of Jesus of Nazareth to people who didn't know him. So just perhaps the people who wrote down that story finally about the dude, maybe they wrote the story in that way so that those two disciples of Jesus would be perfect models for you and me. Those two people could be people that you and I could identify with, because how many times it happens on our journey of faith that we're traveling along the road of life, and Jesus, the risen one, is right there next to us. Closer to us than we are to ourselves. And we don't recognize him. We're so much like those two disciples. We wonder, we doubt, we're afraid. I'll believe if I can see and touch. I'd love to, I think we sometimes say to ourselves, I wish I could believe, really, really, truly believe and be on fire with the good news that Jesus is risen. But I'm one of those people who's, I've got a dear friend who calls himself, I'm a doubter, like Thomas. There are those among us who got to see and feel and touch and hear. So maybe those two disciples are meant so that they're like us. And then what happens later on in the story? At the end of the day, those two travelers are going to go stay at a lodge. And Jesus makes to go on, and they say to Jesus, the day's almost done. Come stay with us. It has struck me for many years, every time I hear and read and pray that story. It's such a wonderful prayer for you and for me. It's inviting God into our lives. Come, stay with us, Lord. Come stay. Be my companion in life. Travel with me. I want to get to know you. And then they go in and they sit down at the table. There are scripture scholars who talk about that Emmaus story as being a theology of what the Eucharist is, of what our coming to this table is about. The story in the scripture says, they sit down at a table and he's telling them more about scripture and so forth. And then at one point he takes bread, blesses it, gives it to them. He takes a cup, blesses it, gives it to them. And it says that their eyes are opened in the breaking of the bread. I suspect that's meant to say something to you and to me about how we celebrate Eucharist. That when you and I celebrate, when we give ourselves, our minds and our hearts and imaginations to celebrating Eucharist, that's what Jesus intends to happen. That our eyes should be open and we recognize it. And then we look back on our lives and say, oh my gosh, were not our hearts burning within us as he told us about the scripture? We missed it. We missed it when it was happening. You know how many times in our lives we miss God visiting us? We miss those moments of grace and blessing and inspiration until we're able at one moment to look back. Come stay with us, please.
Page 9.
Page 9. I suspect this is